I'm 75 years old and I live alone in a house that was once filled with laughter. My name is Noah Atterbury, and ever since my Audrey passed away 4 years ago, I've gotten used to the silence. At first it crushed my ears, made me turn on the TV just for background noise. Now I've learned to appreciate that silence. It won't betray me, it won't deceive me, it won't look at me like I'm a burden. Our house in Horn Lake is small, but more than enough for one elderly person. 2 bedrooms, a living room overlooking the street, a kitchen where I drink my morning coffee, and a porch where Audrey and I once sat in the evenings holding hands. After 48 years of marriage, loneliness feels like a permanently open wound, but I've learned to live with it too. I've worked all my life as an insurance appraiser. Not the most romantic profession, but it provided stability. I've appraised damage caused by fires, floods, hurricanes, car accidents, learned to see the value of things through the soot, dirt, and mangled metal. Perhaps that is why I am so good at seeing the true essence of people behind their smiles and words. Audrey and I have only one child, our daughter Paisley. When she was little, I saw the sunshine in her. Her red hair that she inherited from her mother, her laugh, her spontaneity. She loved to sit on my lap when I told her bedtime stories. Audrey often said I spoiled her, and she was right. I guess that was my biggest mistake. Paisley grew up feeling like the whole world owed her. She wasn't a bad kid. She was just used to getting everything she wanted. First it was toys and dresses, then it was a car at 16, then it was paying for college and money for a rented apartment. Audrey and I wanted to give our daughter what we had been deprived of ourselves, but I'm afraid we overdid it. That all changed when she met Vint Westbrook. I remember the night she brought him to our house. A tall, skinny guy with neatly styled hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. He worked for a company that sold medical equipment and had that special charm that good salesmen have. I sensed the falseness in him right away, but who was I to tell my 27-year-old daughter who to date? "He cares for me so much, Dad," Paisley said, radiant with happiness. "Vint understands me like no one else." Audrey was more perceptive. In the evening, when we were alone, she said, "That young man was looking at our house as if he were appraising its value." I brushed off her words. I wanted to believe that my daughter had found her happiness, though deep down I knew Audrey was right. Vint wasn't appraising the house, he was appraising us, our willingness to help, our savings, our desire to see Paisley happy. They were married a year later. It was a big wedding, just like Paisley wanted. Audrey and I spent on it a considerable part of our savings, but how can you spare money for the happiness of an only child? After a honeymoon in Europe, they moved into a house, the down payment for which we had also given money. I hoped that now that they had everything they needed for a start, they would get on their feet and build their lives on their own. But the calls for financial help started after 3 months. "Dad, we have an unforeseen expense. You know how expensive it is to set up a new house." "Daddy, Vint has a problem at work. We need to get through this month." "Dad, we want to take a vacation to relieve the stress. You know how important a vacation is for your health. At first I gave it to you without question. Then I started asking what exactly the money was for." Paisley took offense, said I didn't trust her. Maybe I didn't. By then, I knew Vint wasn't as successful at his job as he tried to make it seem, and my daughter didn't want to work at all, believing she was meant to be a decoration for the house. Audrey started getting sick when Paisley turned 30. Cancer is a word that turns lives upside down. 2 years of fighting, chemotherapy, remission, relapse. I was by her side every minute, holding her hand when the pain made her cry. Paisley came rarely, always in a hurry. Vint usually waited for her in the car, not even bothering to stop by and say hello to his mother-in-law. "They're very busy," Audrey excused them. "Young people have their own lives." I kept silent, but I was growing bitter inside. Couldn't I find an hour a week to visit my dying mother? Were Vint's career, which he didn't really have, and Paisley's social gatherings more important? After Audrey died, I was all alone. I didn't want to go home. Every corner reminded me of her. I sat in the hospital corridor, not knowing what to do next. My daughter didn't arrive until the next day when all the formalities had been settled. "I'm sorry, Daddy, we were in an important meeting and couldn't leave," she said, hugging me. She smelled of expensive perfume and wine. The funeral was quiet. Paisley insisted on cremation, even though Audrey wanted to be buried next to her parents in the old cemetery. "It's more practical," the daughter said, and I didn't find the strength to argue. It was as if my will had died with my wife. After the funeral, my daughter's visits became even less frequent and her requests for money more frequent. Sometimes I thought she only thought of me when she and Vent needed financial help. I gave because it was the last link between me and her. I was afraid that if I said no, I'd never see her again. 3 years ago, they asked for money to start their own business. Vint wanted to start a consulting firm. I gave them almost all my savings. The business lasted less than a year. When I cautiously asked what had gone wrong, Paisley replied irritably, "There's so much competition now, Dad. You don't understand today's market." Maybe I didn't. But I did understand that they were living beyond their means. A new car, expensive clothes, a vacation to Bali. I began to wonder if all the money really went into the business, or if some of it was in their pockets. I turned 74 last year. Paisley and Vint didn't show up for my birthday. They sent a card via email, didn't even call. That evening I sat on the veranda looking up at the stars and talked to Audrey as I did every night. "We did something wrong, dear. Where did we go wrong in our parenting?" The answer was silence, but in that silence I felt peaceful. For the first time in a long time, I admitted to myself that my daughter is not the person I wanted her to be. She is selfish, calculating, and callous, and her husband is just a parasite sucking on other people's money. The thought brought a strange relief. I was no longer deluding myself, no longer justifying their behavior. I saw them for what they were, and I decided that I would no longer be their ATM. The next time they asked for money, I would say no. The opportunity to test my resolve came a month later. Paisley called with another heartwarming story about how they needed money for medical treatment. I politely but firmly said no. There was a pause, then she burst into recriminations. "After all we've done for you, you're all alone. Who will take care of you if not us?" I almost laughed. All they've done for me consisted of rare phone calls and even rarer visits, always ending with requests for money. "I'll manage on my own," I replied calmly. From then on, our communication became even more strained. They called only when they needed something, and I learned to say no. Sometimes, in moments of weakness, I still hoped that there was something left in my daughter from that little girl who would climb into my lap and ask me to tell a story. But each time, reality dashed those hopes. Deep down, I knew it was pointless to hope for a real family connection. They only saw me as a wallet, not a father and father-in-law. And yet, despite all the hurt and disappointment, I couldn't completely cut them out of my life. Paisley is my flesh and blood, the only thing left of Audrey and me. It may be a weakness, but even now, knowing how they really are, I still had hope that one day something would change. It was Tuesday, an ordinary day, unremarkable. I got up at 6 in the morning, as I'd gotten used to over decades of work, even though I'd been retired for 8 years. I drank coffee, looked at the newspaper, which I still subscribe to out of old habit, had oatmeal for breakfast, as Dr. Ramsay advised. "Watch your cholesterol, Mr. Atterbury. It's important at your age." At 9 o'clock, I got to work cleaning up. Audrey had always laughed at my pedantry, but since her death, that trait had only intensified. Every single thing has to be in its proper place. When you live alone, the order of the house is the last thing you can control. I was dusting off the pictures in the living room when the phone rang. It was Paisley, which was unexpected. She usually only called on weekends and not every week. "Dad," her voice sounded strained, "Vint and I want to stop by your place on Saturday. We need to talk." "Is something wrong?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Nothing's wrong. It's just, we're having some financial difficulties." Sure." I suppressed a sigh. "Paisley, we've discussed this. I can't give you any more money. My pension is barely enough for my own needs." "God, Dad!" Her voice became instantly irritated. "You're always thinking about money. We just want to visit you, and you're getting so suspicious lately." I didn't argue. It was useless. We exchanged a few more sentences, and she hung up, remembering to remind me that they'd be here on Saturday for lunch. Putting the phone down, I felt tired. These conversations always wore me out. I decided to go upstairs and lie down for half an hour. Afterward, I couldn't remember exactly what had happened. Walking up the stairs, I must have snagged the edge of the carpeting. Or maybe I got dizzy, which had been happening lately. All I remember is the sensation of losing my balance, the desperate attempt to grab the railing, and the sharp pain that pierced my whole body. I came to my senses on the floor at the foot of the stairs. The pain in my left hip was unbearable. I tried to get up, but my legs wouldn't budge. The phone remained on the living room table, so close and so unattainably far away. I don't know how long I lay there, occasionally passing out from the pain. Several hours, I think. I was rescued by Mrs. Goodwin, a neighbor who occasionally stopped by to check on me. She was in the habit of knocking and, without waiting for an answer, looking in. "At our age, it's best to be reassured," she used to say. That day, I was grateful for her cavalier attitude. "Oh my God, Noah!" she exclaimed when she saw me. "Don't move. I'll call an ambulance." I was taken to the hospital at dusk. X-rays confirmed what I already felt, a fractured femoral neck. "A typical injury for your age," the young Dr. Patterson said in a tone of sympathy mixed with professional indifference. I was about to undergo surgery to insert a metal pin. "You'll need help after you're discharged," he warned. "Do you have someone who can take care of you?" I thought of Paisley and Vint and almost laughed. "My daughter and son-in-law," I answered without going into details. I asked the nurse to call Paisley. She promised to come the next day, and I spent a sleepless night thinking about how this injury would change my life. At 75, fractures like this are often the beginning of the end of independence. I would have to use a walker, perhaps even hire a caregiver. I imagined how my daughter would take this news and felt a heaviness in my chest. Paisley and Vint showed up around noon the next day. She entered the room with a bouquet that looked like it had been purchased at the hospital kiosk at the last minute. Vint followed her with a look of bored irritation on his face. "Daddy," Paisley exclaimed, kissing me on the cheek. "You scared us so much." Her perfume was too strong for the hospital room, causing mild nausea. "How did that happen?" Vint asked, settling into the chair beside the bed. He looked like a man mentally calculating how long he'd have to spend here. I told them about the fall. Paisley shook her head, inserting comments like, "How awful," and "Poor Dad," but I could see her thoughts were somewhere far away. "What did the doctors say?" she finally asked when I was done. "Tomorrow is surgery, then rehab, and I might need some help around the house." Vint and Paisley exchanged quick glances. "Of course we'll help," she said, but her eyes avoided mine. "It's just, we're going through a rough patch. Vint's between jobs and we're having financial difficulties." Vint interrupted her, cutting to the chase. "That's what we wanted to talk about on Saturday." I looked at them, lying in the hospital bed, helpless, with tubes sticking out of my veins, and realized that they saw my injury as an opportunity, as a fortunate coincidence. "We need help to get us through a couple months," Vint continued. "I'm waiting to hear back from a company that should be up and running by the fall. I've heard that countless times. There was always some company, some interview, some opportunity that was about to change their lives, but nothing ever changed." "I don't have any money to spare," I replied tiredly. "My pension goes to housekeeping and medication." "And the insurance?" Paisley asked quickly. "You have health insurance, don't you?" I do, but it doesn't cover everything. Daddy. Paisley took my hand, and for a second I saw something in her eyes that looked like genuine concern. You're going to need help after the hospital. We can take you back to our place, but our house, you know, we're having trouble making payments right now. We could lose the house, Vint added grimly. I closed my eyes. How typical of them. Instead of offering help, they ask for it from me, lying in the hospital with a broken hip. I have about 20,000 in my account, I said finally. That's all I have left. Paisley's face brightened. That's enough to pay off the debt on the house, and there's enough left over for your treatment. How am I supposed to access the account while I'm lying here? I asked, already knowing where they were going with this. We could help, Vamp began cautiously. If we had a power of attorney, here it was. I looked at my daughter and her husband and saw the greed behind their concerned faces. They saw me not as a father in need of care, but as a source of money who was finally vulnerable. And how do you envision this? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Very simple, Vent perked up, sensing I wasn't saying no right away. We'll bring all the necessary paperwork. You sign the power of attorney and we can pay your bills while you're here. And ours too, I suppose, I added quietly. Paisley threw me an annoyed look. Dad, you always think the worst of us. We care about you. If we lose the house, where will you go after the hospital? That was a good question. I had no other relatives except for my sister Eleanor, who lives in Texas and whom we hadn't spoken to in years. There were almost no friends left. Some had died. Some had moved to live with their children in other cities. My house was too big for one, with stairs that were now a hazard. Maybe it was time to think about a nursing home. I'll think about it, I said finally. There's nothing to think about, Vince stood up, indicating that the conversation was over. You have surgery tomorrow and then rehab. You need to focus on getting better, not worrying about bills. Paisley kissed my cheek again. We'll stop by tomorrow before surgery with the paperwork. It's going to be okay, Dad. We'll take care of you. When they left, I stared at the ceiling for a long time. Part of me wanted to believe them, wanted to think that in a critical situation, kinship would override greed. But I knew them too well. The next day they came early in the morning, as promised. The surgery was scheduled for 11 o'clock, and the nurses were already preparing me by administering the first doses of sedatives. We're all set, Vince said, pulling out a folder of paperwork. This is a standard power of attorney, authorizing us to handle your finances while you're in the hospital. I reviewed the document as far as my drug-addled mind would allow. The power of attorney was competently written and gave them complete control over my bank accounts. I knew it was a mistake to sign it, knew they wouldn't stop at paying the bills and helping with my treatment. But what could I do? Lying in a hospital bed, pumped full of medication, preparing for a surgery that depended on the outcome of whether I could even walk. I had no choice. Sign here and here. Vint pointed to the signature lines, holding out a pen to me. My hand trembled as I signed. Paisley smiled, taking the paperwork. That's it. Now rest and don't worry about anything. A nurse came in to check on my condition. Visiting hours are over, she said. We need to prep the patient for surgery. Paisley kissed my forehead. We'll visit you tomorrow, Daddy. Everything's going to be okay. I watched them leave and felt the drugs fogging my mind. My last thought before falling into sleep was, I just gave them everything I had left. The surgery was a success, as Dr. Patterson informed me when I regained consciousness in the recovery room. The metal pin held the bone securely in place, and with proper rehabilitation, I should regain mobility. You'll need physical therapy, he said, and probably a walker at first. The nurse will discuss a recovery program with you. I nodded, still feeling the effects of the anesthesia. The world seemed fuzzy, blurred at the edges. The pain was dulled by the morphine, but I knew it would return. Paisley and Vint didn't show up the next day as promised. Not the next day or the day after that. I tried calling them, but No one was picking up. On the fourth day after the surgery, I asked the nurse to try to contact them. "They're not answering," she said when she came back. "Do you want me to keep trying?" I shook my head. I already knew they weren't going to answer. They had gotten what they wanted, access to my money. They didn't need me now. On the fifth day, the first physical therapy sessions began. The pain was excruciating, but I forced myself to move, knowing that my independence depended on it. The therapist, a young woman named Ashley, was patient and supportive. "You're doing well, Mr. Atterbury," she said. "Many patients your age recover more slowly." I clung to those words like a lifeline. I needed to recover. I needed to get back on my feet, and not just physically. I needed to regain control of my life. On the seventh day after surgery, when I was struggling to move around the room with the aid of a walker, Paisley and Vince showed up. They looked rested and were dressed in new, expensive clothes. "Daddy, you're getting up!" Paisley exclaimed with feigned delight. "It's wonderful!" I looked at them and felt anger rising inside. Where have they been all this time? What have they done with my money? "We took care of your bills," Vince said, pulling some papers out of his pocket. "Here are the receipts for the hospital bills." I took the papers with trembling hands. The amounts were less than I'd expected. Much less. "Where's the rest of the money?" I asked bluntly. Paisley and Vint exchanged glances. "We paid off the debt on our house like we said," Paisley answered. "And we bought some necessities. It's all for your own good, Dad. When you get out of here, you'll have a comfortable place to recover." I squeezed the handrails of the walker so hard my knuckles turned white. "How much left on the count?" Vince shrugged. "Not much. But don't worry, your pension will cover the rest of your medical expenses." I realized they'd taken everything. $20,000 was the last of the savings I'd been saving for a rainy day. Just in case I needed a nursing home or long-term care, it's all gone. "When will you be discharged?" Paisley asked, changing the subject. "We have to get the room ready." "In a week, if there are no complications," I answered mechanically. "Great. That'll give us just enough time to take care of some business." Vint glanced at his watch. "We should go. We have a meeting in an hour." They left as suddenly as they had come, leaving me with a feeling of utter helplessness. I was confined to a hospital bed. My money was gone, and the future looked dim. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night, pondering my situation. I felt betrayed, used, thrown away for nothing. But through the bitterness and resentment there was determination. I will not give up so easily. I would recover and find a way to regain control of my life. They thought I was a helpless old man to be manipulated. Maybe I was. But even a helpless old man can fight back when cornered. The days in the hospital stretched slowly. My routine consisted of treatments, exercises with the physical therapist, meals, and long hours of just lying there, looking up at the ceiling or out the window at the piece of sky visible from my bunk. Sometimes I read books brought in by a nurse, Bethany, who noticed that I never had visitors. She was young, perhaps 25, with lively eyes and a kind smile, and seemed genuinely interested in my condition. "You look better today, Mr. Atterbury," she said, checking my blood pressure. "A little more of this and we won't recognize you at all." I appreciated her kindness, even though I knew it was her job to take care of her patients. In a world where even my own daughter saw me only as a source of money, it was nice to feel some human warmth. Paisley and Vin hadn't shown up since the day they'd confessed to taking almost all of my savings. I'd called them several times, but they either didn't answer or the conversation was short and perfunctory. "We're very busy, Dad," Paisley said irritably. "Getting the room ready for you, settling things." I was beginning to suspect that they weren't going to take me back to their place after I was discharged. Perhaps they planned to just leave me in the hospital, shifting all the problems to the medical staff. I wasn't sure that was the worst option. The prospect of living with people who had ripped me off didn't seem appealing. On the 10th day after the surgery, Dr. Patterson reported that I was recovering well and could be discharged in 3 days. "You'll still need help," he warned. "It's better to have someone around for the first time. Is your daughter ready to pick you up?" I nodded, not wanting to admit that I wasn't sure. I was ashamed of my family, of being virtually abandoned at 75. That evening, I received my first message from Paisley in days. I was just eating dinner when my old cell phone, which the nurses allowed me to keep with me, beeped. I struggled to reach the nightstand and open the message. "We flew away taking all your money. Bye." I reread the message several times, not believing my eyes. Was this some kind of joke? A cruel prank? But why? Why write such a thing to an elderly person lying in the hospital after surgery? Before I knew it, a second message arrived, this time from Vint. It was a photo of him and Paisley in the cabin, champagne glasses in hand, smiling broadly at the camera. Vint gives a thumbs up and Paisley sends an air kiss. A Hawaiian Airlines sign can be seen in the background. The caption under the photo read, "Thanks for the vacation, man. Maybe we'll bring you a fridge magnet." I felt nausea coming up to my throat. The plate of hospital dinner tipped over as I jerked forward, not believing what I was seeing. Mashed potatoes spilled over the sheet, but I didn't even notice it. All my attention was on the phone screen, on those smiling faces, on those words full of contempt and mockery. They hadn't just taken my money, they were proud of it. They turned the theft into entertainment, an excuse to have fun. They flew to a luxurious resort on the money of an old man who had recently been lying under anesthesia on an operating table. I don't know how long it was before Nurse Bethany peeked into the room and saw me like that, with my food tipped over, my phone in my trembling hands, my face wet with tears I hadn't even noticed. "Mr. Atterbury," she exclaimed, rushing toward me. "What's the matter? Are you ill?" I couldn't speak. I just held out my phone to her, showing her the messages. She read them, and her face changed shock, disbelief, and then deep sympathy. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." She helped me change into clean hospital pajamas, changed my bedding, and brought me a new dinner, even though I said I wasn't hungry. Then she sat down next to my bed and took my hand. "Would you like to talk about it?" And I started talking. For the first time in a long time, I opened up to someone, talked about my life, about Paisley, about how our relationship was slowly deteriorating, about their constant demands for money, about recent events. The words flowed, and with each word I felt the weight on my heart get a little lighter. Bethany listened attentively, not interrupting, only occasionally nodding or squeezing my hand for support. When I finished, she was silent for a while, and then she said, "You don't deserve to be treated like that, Mr. Atterbury. No one does." "I must have been wrong somewhere," I said quietly. "In my upbringing, in our relationship. I must have done something wrong if my own daughter is capable of such cruelty." Bethany shook her head. "Don't blame yourself. Some people are like that, no matter how they were raised. But I couldn't help but blame myself. All night, lying awake, I went over the years I'd spent with Paisley, trying to figure out exactly where I'd taken a wrong turn. Maybe Audrey and I had spoiled her too much, always giving her what she wanted, never saying no, never setting boundaries. She grew up with the belief that the world owed her, that she deserved better simply because she was her. Or maybe it was the fact that I worked too much when she was little. The insurance company sent me on long business trips, and I was often gone for a week or more at a time. Perhaps this created an emotional distance between us, a void that the gifts and fulfillment of all her wishes couldn't fill. Or maybe the problem was deeper than that. Maybe I never really taught her empathy, responsibility, respect for others. Was I myself a good example of these qualities? I remembered an incident when Paisley was 12. She had broken a vase, an antique that Audrey had inherited from her grandmother. Audrey was upset, but Paisley didn't apologize. Instead, she accused us of putting the vase in an inconvenient place. I should have insisted on an apology then, to show her that such behavior was unacceptable, but I kept silent, not wanting a conflict. There was another incident when she was 16. She took my credit card without authorization and spent a significant amount on clothes. When I discovered this, she said that she needed to look decent for school and that if I gave her enough pocket money, she wouldn't have to take the card. Again, I relented, increasing her allowance instead of punishing her for stealing. Maybe I was always taking the path of least resistance, giving in, backing down, avoiding confrontation. And as a result, I raised a daughter who considered this behavior the norm, to take what you want without thinking about the consequences or other people's feelings. But there was another side to it. I remembered reading her bedtime stories, teaching her how to ride a bike, comforting her after her first heartbreak. I remembered how she snuggled up to me during thunderstorms, afraid of thunder, how she drew birthday cards for me, how she proudly showed off her first school achievements. Somewhere along the way, that little girl disappeared and her place was taken by a selfish, calculating woman who could steal her father's last savings and brag about it. In the morning, I felt drained emotionally and physically. The nurse who had replaced Bethany looked worriedly at my circles under my eyes. "Bad night, Mr. Atterbury?" I nodded without going into detail. After breakfast, which I barely touched, I called my bank. As I suspected, the account was empty. All $20,000 I had saved up over the years had disappeared in a matter of days. The bank officer confirmed that the money had been withdrawn under the power of attorney I had signed, and legally everything was legitimate. "You can revoke the power of attorney," he suggested, "but it will be difficult to get back the funds already withdrawn, unless you can prove that the signature was obtained fraudulently or under duress." I thanked him and hung up. I had neither the strength nor the means to prove anything now. And what would it change? The money had already been spent on tickets and a hotel in Hawaii, on champagne and God knows what else. I lay staring at the ceiling and felt a strange numbness. It was as if all the emotions, the anger, the resentment, the frustration, had burned out overnight, leaving behind nothing but emptiness. I tried to figure out how I felt about my daughter now. Hate? No, too strong a word. I couldn't hate my own flesh and blood, no matter how much it hurt me. Disappointment? Yes, but that feeling had haunted me for years. Probably the closest was a feeling of deep sadness, not just for the lost money, but for the lost relationships, for what could have been, but never will be. In the afternoon, I was visited by the hospital social worker, a middle-aged woman named Lauren. Apparently, Bethany had told her about my situation. "Mr. Atterbury," she began, sitting at my bedside with a folder of papers, "I understand you have difficult circumstances. Dr. Patterson says you will be discharged soon and we need to decide where you will go." I explained that I planned to return to my home, although I realized that would be difficult with my limited mobility. "You live alone, right?" she asked, making notes. "And the house has stairs." I nodded. "After an operation like this, it will be difficult for you to manage on your own, especially in the first few weeks," she said. "We can arrange for a caregiver to come in a few times a week, but that's not covered by insurance, and given your financial situation—" She didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. Without money, my options were limited. "There's also the option of a rehab center," she continued. "There you'll get the care and physical therapy you need. Some of the costs are covered by insurance, but not all." I sighed. Rehabilitation center sounded like a euphemism for nursing home, a place where they send old people who have no one to take care of them. I was always afraid of ending my days that way. "Do you have any other relatives who might be able to help?" Lauren asked, seeing my confusion. I told her about my sister Eleanor, whom we hadn't spoken to in years because of an old family quarrel. She lived in a small town in Texas and was 2 years older than me. "Maybe we should contact her," Lauren suggested. "Sometimes in tough times, old grudges get put on the back burner." I promised to think about it, though I doubted Eleanor would want to talk to me, let alone invite me in. After the social worker left, I lay there for a long time thinking about my situation. It seemed hopeless. My savings were gone. My daughter had betrayed me. The future looked bleak. I felt cornered, more helpless than I had ever felt in my life. And yet, somewhere deep inside, there was a spark, not hope. No, it was too early for hope, but a stubborn will not to give up. I'd lived a long life, survived the loss of my beloved wife, dealt with loneliness and betrayal. Would I really let this situation break me? That evening, when the hospital noise died down and the lights in the corridors dimmed, I picked up my phone and searched for Eleanor's number. We hadn't spoken since we'd had a fight over our parents' inheritance over 15 years ago. I wasn't even sure I had her actual number, but I was lucky. The phone was still working. After 5 beeps, when I was ready to give up, the phone was picked up. "Hello?" The voice was older than I remembered, but still recognizable. "Eleanor?" It was Noah. There was a long pause. I could almost see her sitting in her rocking chair, clutching the receiver, surprised and perhaps wary. "Noah?" She finally spoke up. It had been so many years. Had something happened? I didn't know where to begin, how to explain 15 years of silence and then suddenly ask for help. How could I tell her about my humiliation, about betraying my daughter, about being penniless? "I'm in the hospital," I finally said. "I broke my hip. I'm in trouble." I explained the situation briefly, trying not to get emotional. She listened in silence, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I was done, she sighed. "God, Noah, I'm so sorry. I expected a rejection, maybe even a rebuke for only turning to her when I was in trouble. But instead, she said, 'You are my brother, no matter what. My home is open to you.' I felt a lump come up in my throat. "Thank you, Ellie," I said, using her childhood nickname that I hadn't uttered in decades. "I don't know how to thank you." "Just get well," she replied. "I can come in 2 days and pick you up. That's the time to get things organized." When I hung up the phone, I felt a tear run down my cheek. For the first time in a long time, it wasn't a tear of bitterness or disappointment, but a tear of relief. Perhaps all was not yet lost. Perhaps there is hope for a fresh start, even at 75. That night I couldn't sleep again, but this time not because of bitter reflections on the past, but because of the uncertainty of the future. I thought about Eleanor, about a new beginning in Texas, about how I would rebuild and perhaps build a new life. But most of all, I thought about Paisley and Vint, their smiling faces in the airplane photo. They didn't know I had found a way out of the situation they had put me in. They thought they had condemned me to poverty and dependence on public assistance. What would they say if they found out I was moving in with Eleanor? How would they feel when they realized their cruel plan hadn't worked? These thoughts brought me no satisfaction, only sadness. Sadness that my daughter had become a person capable of such cruelty. Sadness that I may have played a role in her becoming that person. Sadness that our relationship, which was supposed to be a source of mutual support and love, had turned into a toxic game of power and money. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine a future without Paisley and Vint, a future where I would finally be free of their manipulations and demands. It was hard they'd been a part of my life for so long, but maybe it was necessary for my own survival and peace of mind. Paisley Westbrook awoke to sunlight pouring into the room through the panoramic windows. She stretched, enjoying the silky touch of the expensive linens against her skin. Vint was quietly slumbering next to her, his face relaxed and serene in his sleep. She smiled, feeling satisfied. They deserved this vacation, deserved this luxury. Careful not to wake her husband, Paisley slipped out of bed and walked to the window. From the 12th floor of the Azure Lagoon Hotel, there was a stunning view of the ocean, a vast blue that merged with the horizon. The palm trees on the beach swayed slightly in the light breeze, and the early tourists were already spreading their towels on the white sand. Their room was one of the best in the hotel, a two-room suite with a separate living room, jacuzzi tub, and balcony overlooking the ocean. $3,000 a night. The money her father had been saving for years was melting away at an incredible rate, but Paisley didn't care. The old man didn't need it anymore, but she and Vint deserved a little luxury after all those years of constant saving and failed attempts to get rich. The thought of her father dampened her mood for a second. The picture Vint had sent him from the airplane was perhaps a little too cruel. But after all, didn't her father deserve it? For years he'd manipulated them, dosing them with financial aid, making them feel like losers, dependent on his generosity. Now they just took what was due them. Paisley pushed those thoughts away. No sense ruining her vacation by thinking about the past. She turned to the minibar and pulled out a bottle of champagne. Why not start the day with a glass of sparkling? They're in Hawaii, and it's their third day in paradise. Time to enjoy it to the fullest. The sound of the bottle being uncorked woke Vint. He propped himself up on his elbows, his hair mussed, his eyes still sleepy. "Champagne for breakfast?" he muttered with a smile. "I like your style, darling." Paisley filled 2 glasses and handed one to her husband, settling next to him on the bed. "To us," she said, clinking glasses with his. "And to our new life." Vint took a sip and grimaced. "Wasn't it a little early for a toast like that? Your father's money won't last forever. We need a plan." Paisley rolled her eyes. Vint was always like that. Even in moments of triumph, he found reason to worry. "Relax, sweetheart. We still have about 15 grand left. Enough for a couple weeks here, and then we'll figure something out. Maybe finally get that online business you were talking about up and running." Vint shook his head, but didn't argue. Instead, he reached for his phone. "Look what's on the local news," he said, flipping through the articles. "Some kind of tropical storm is heading toward the islands. Moana, I think." "So?" Paisley asked indifferently, taking another sip of champagne. "This is Hawaii. There's always some kind of storm." "I don't know." Vint frowned, reading on. "They say it can be pretty strong. Some hotels on the North Coast have already started preparations." "We're on the South Coast," Paisley said, "and in one of the best hotels. I'm sure they know what they're doing." She got up and headed for the bathroom, determined to take a long, relaxing shower before breakfast. After all, they had paid for full service, including the champagne buffet. It would have been silly to miss it because of some storm that might not even reach their part of the island. Later, over breakfast on the restaurant's outdoor terrace, they watched as the hotel staff began to remove the lounge chairs and umbrellas from the beach. The sky over the ocean gradually clouded over and the wind picked up, becoming more gusty. "See?" Vince said, pointing at the workers. "Something is clearly going on." Paisley, watching the commotion, began to feel slightly uneasy. She didn't want anything to ruin their perfect vacation, especially now that they could finally afford everything they wanted. "Let's ask at reception," she suggested, finishing her 3rd glass of champagne. "If it's serious, they'll tell us." The reception was unusually busy. Several guests were standing around the counter, talking excitedly. Paisley and Vint stood in line, listening to the conversations. "The evacuation of the North Coast has already begun. The storm is predicted to strengthen to a Category 3 hurricane, advising people to stock up on water and non-perishable food." When it was their turn, the receptionist, a young Hawaiian woman with a tense face, tried to smile. What can I do for you?" "We heard about the storm," Vint said. "How serious is it?" The girl sighed, apparently tired of answering that question. "Tropical storm Moana is strengthening and is expected to reach our island tomorrow morning. Authorities are recommending evacuation of coastal areas, including our hotel." "Evacuation?" Paisley asked, not believing her ears. "But we just got here." "I understand your disappointment," the receptionist replied with practiced politeness. "The hotel will arrange transportation to the evacuation centers. All guests must be out of the building by 18 o'clock today. You will, of course, be refunded for any unused days of your stay." Vint and Paisley looked at each other. Their perfect vacation was crumbling before their eyes. "What if we decide to stay?" Vint asked. "It's a sturdy building, 12th floor." The receptionist shook her head. "We can't forbid you to stay, but we strongly advise against it. The hotel will not provide services once the evacuation begins. There will be no food, possible power and water outages." "But we paid for a suite." Paisley was outraged. $3,000 a night, and now you're suggesting we move to some evacuation center? "We understand your frustration," the girl repeated, "but the safety of our guests is our priority. The storm could be very dangerous." Back in the room, Paisley and Vint began to argue. Vint thought they should follow the recommendations and evacuate, while Paisley insisted on staying. "You've seen the walls here," she said, pointing to the sturdy construction of the building. "This hotel was built with storms in mind, and in the evacuation center, they'll stick us in a gym with hundreds of other people. No amenities, no privacy, everything we paid for." "But if the storm is really big," Vint started. "It's just a reassurance," Paisley interrupted him. "The authorities always exaggerate the danger so they can't be accused of inaction. We're on the 12th floor, Vint. What kind of flood would reach the 12th floor?" In the end, Vint gave in, as he always did. He knew it was useless to argue with Paisley when she had made up her mind about something. And frankly, the prospect of an evacuation center didn't appeal to him either. They decided to stock up on water and food, just in case. There was already a line forming at the small store at the hotel. Other guests were stocking up too. The shelves were quickly emptying. Paisley and Vint managed to buy a few bottles of water, packs of crackers, canned goods, and candy bars. Vint also bought a flashlight and a pack of batteries. By late afternoon, the hotel was noticeably empty. Most of the guests chose to evacuate. There were only a few people in the restaurant where they dined, and the menu had been reduced to a few simple dishes. The staff had also thinned noticeably. Only the most essential members of staff remained. During the night, Paisley awoke to the howling of the wind. It had intensified to the point where it sounded like someone was scraping on the window panes. She went to the balcony and carefully pulled back the curtain. The sight outside made her shudder. The ocean, still calm and welcoming in the morning, was now a raging mass. Huge waves with white crests were crashing against the shore. The palm trees were bending in the wind, some of them already broken. The rain was hitting the glass with such force that it looked like it was about to shatter. "Vint," she called, coming back to the bed. "Vint, wake up!" He mumbled something through his sleep and opened his eyes reluctantly. "What is it?" "Storm. It's here. And it's strong." Vint stood up and walked over to the window as well. His face darkened at the sight of the storm. "Maybe we should have evacuated," he said quietly. Paisley felt annoyed. Vint was always like this, agreeing with her and then, when something went wrong, insinuating that she was wrong. "It'll be all right," she said. "We're on the 12th floor, remember?" They slept restlessly the rest of the night, waking up to particularly strong gusts of wind or peals of thunder. By morning, the storm had only gotten worse. The power went out around 4 a.m., and they woke up in darkness and silence, broken only by the howl of the wind and the sound of the rain. Paisley tried to call the front desk, but the phone didn't work. Cell service was gone too. They were cut off from the world. "What are we going to do?" Vint asked, trying to light the candle they had bought yesterday. "Wait," replied Paisley. "The storm can't go on forever." They spent the day in the room, saving food and water supplies, listening to the elements raging outside the windows. Around noon, water began to seep under the balcony door. At first it was just small puddles, but gradually they grew larger. Screw tried to block the gap with towels, but it didn't help much. How could the water get so high? Paisley wondered, watching the moisture spread across the carpet. It's not seawater, Vint explained. It's rain. There's so much of it that the gutter system can't handle it. By late afternoon, the water on the balcony was up to his ankles. The rain didn't stop, and the wind seemed to be getting stronger. One of the chaise lounges on the balcony of a neighboring room was blown away like a dry leaf. They heard screams in the hallway and looked out of the room. The few remaining guests and members of the staff were rushing toward the stairs. "What's going on?" Vint asked a hotel employee running past. "The first floor is completely flooded," he replied as he ran. "The water's rising. We have to go higher." Paisley and Vint looked at each other. The situation was getting really dangerous. "We need to pack," said Vint. "The essentials." They began frantically packing valuables, documents, money, phones, chargers. Paisley insisted on taking her new designer shoes, which she'd bought at the hotel boutique for $800, and some jewelry. By the time they stepped out into the hallway with their bags, water had already begun to seep through the floor. The elevators were not working, so they headed for the stairs, where they met a group of other guests who had also decided to go higher. "They say there are still employees on the upper floors," one of them said. They had set up some sort of temporary shelter in the banquet hall on the 20th floor. Climbing the stairs, they actually found about 30 people there, guests and hotel staff. Someone had already spread blankets and bedspreads on the floor, creating makeshift sleeping places. In the center of the room were tables with bottles of water and light snacks. "This is not how I imagined a vacation in Hawaii," Paisley murmured, settling into a corner of the room. The night had been long and uncomfortable. Sleeping on the floor, surrounded by strangers, with the incessant noise of the elements, was almost impossible. By the morning of the second day of the storm, Paisley was exhausted, irritated, and frightened. She had never realized that nature could be so cruel and relentless. Around noon, they heard the sound of a helicopter. Everyone rushed to the windows. A rescue helicopter was hovering over the hotel, fighting the wind. One of the hotel staff radioed it. "They're evacuating people," he announced after a few minutes. But not all at once. Children and the elderly first. The evacuation took several hours. The helicopter could only take a few people at a time, and each flight was risky because of the high winds. Finally, it was Paisley and Vint's turn. "Just the essentials," the lifeguard warned as he helped them climb aboard. "Nothing heavy." Paisley had to leave her designer shoes and most of her shopping behind. She only took her purse with her money, papers, and cell phone. The flight was a nightmare. The helicopter was tossed from side to side, and several times it looked like they were about to crash. Paisley squeezed Vint's hand so tightly that her knuckles turned white. They were taken to an evacuation center in a school gymnasium in the central part of the island, far from the coast. Hundreds of evacuees, tourists and locals, were already here. Rows of cots separated only by thin partitions for a semblance of privacy. Long lines for toilets and showers. Noise, children screaming, crying, talking in different languages. All this created an atmosphere of chaos. They were given 2 blankets, pillows, bottles of water, and bags of dry rations. Their cots were almost in the center of the hall, with no privacy. "This can't be happening," Paisley whispered, looking around. "We paid $3,000 for a night in a suite, and now we're lying on cots in the school gym?" Vint looked exhausted. "At least we're alive," he said. "A lot of people are less fortunate." He nodded toward a television set in the corner of the gym. It showed news reports of the storm, destroyed houses, flooded streets, people clinging to roofs and trees for rescue. "But our stuff," Paisley began. "Forget the stuff," Vint interrupted her sharply. "We almost died. Do you realize that? If we had evacuated yesterday like we were advised, we'd be in a proper evacuation center right now, not here." Paisley wanted to object, but suddenly felt fatigue come over her like a heavy blanket. She sank down on the cot and closed her eyes. Sleep didn't come. Instead, her father's face flashed before her eyes, not angry or hurt as she had expected, but sad and disappointed. What would he say if he saw her now drenched, scared, lying on a cot in a crowded gymnasium? Would he laugh at the irony of the situation? Or perhaps, would he still sympathize? In the evening, when most people were already asleep, Paisley cried quietly, tucked into the hard pillow. She cried for the lost luxury, for the ruined vacation, for the money wasted. But somewhere deep inside, she cried for something else too, for the relationships she'd destroyed for that money, for the trust she'd betrayed, for the fact that she didn't even know if her father was still alive. Eleanor arrived, as promised, 2 days later. I hadn't seen my sister in 15 years, and time had not spared her as it had me. Her hair was completely gray. Wrinkles furrowed her once smooth face, her back a little hunched. But her eyes were the same clear blue eyes I remembered from my childhood. "Noah," she said, hugging me gently, afraid of hurting me. "It's so good to see you." I felt a lump in my throat as I responded to her hug. How foolish we'd wasted so many years on resentment and silence. How much time we could have spent together supporting each other. Eleanor brought with her all the necessary paperwork for my discharge and took it upon herself to communicate with the hospital staff. Dr. Patterson was pleased with my progress and made recommendations for further rehabilitation. Bethany came to say goodbye, and I was touched to see tears glistening in her eyes. "Get well, Mr. Atterbury," she said, shaking my hand, "and don't let anyone else treat you like that." Before I left, I insisted on stopping by my house. I needed to pick up some personal belongings, documents, and pictures of Audrey that I couldn't leave behind. I also wanted to write a letter for Paisley and Wint, knowing that sooner or later they would return there expecting to find me helpless and dependent on their mercy. The house greeted us with silence and a slight, musty smell. Eleanor helped me up the steps, supporting me under her arm. It was strange to see my home through the eyes of an outsider. The things that had seemed so important now just looked old and unnecessary. I realized I wouldn't miss this place. Too many painful memories, too much loneliness. I gathered the essentials: photo albums, documents, a few of Audrey's memorabilia, her favorite brooch that I kept in a box. Then I sat down at the table in the kitchen and began writing the letter. Eleanor tactfully left me alone, busily engaged in packing my clothes. "Paisley and Vint," I wrote, trying to keep my hand from shaking. "By the time you read this letter, I will be far away. I've gone to live with my sister Eleanor in Texas, and I don't plan to return. I knew your intentions from the beginning. I saw the greed in your eyes when you came to the hospital. I knew you had no intention of taking care of me, only wanting my money. And yet I signed the power of attorney because at that moment I had no choice. The money you took, $20,000, was all I had left. The last of the savings I'd been saving for years for emergencies. Now I have nothing left but the pension I'll get for the rest of my life. I filed a theft report with the police. I don't know if they'll investigate it considering I technically gave you power of attorney, but I wanted it on record, to leave a trail of what you did. As of this moment, I am severing all ties with you. You are no longer my family. Do not attempt to contact me or find me. Do not call or write. You ceased to exist for me the moment you sent me that text and picture from the airplane. I hope you had a good time in Hawaii. I hope this money brought you as much happiness as it would have brought me peace of mind and confidence in the future. Noah Atterbury. I sealed the letter in an envelope and put it in a prominent place on the kitchen table, then walked around the house one last time, saying goodbye to the place where I had lived most of my life. In every room I could see ghosts of the past. This is where Audrey liked to sit with a book. This is where little Paisley took her first steps. This is where we celebrated birthdays, Christmas, anniversaries. "Are you ready?" Eleanor asked, standing in the doorway with my bag. I nodded. I was ready to put all this behind me and start a new chapter of life, even if I didn't have much time left. The drive to Texas was a long one. Eleanor and I stopped at motels so I could rest, because sitting for long periods of time with my injury was hard. We talked for hours, catching up on lost years, healing old wounds, getting to know each other anew. She told me about her life in a small Texas town, about her late husband Ray, about her children, who were grown and gone to different states, about her grandchildren who came for vacations. "You'll love it there," she said. "It's quiet, peaceful, people are friendly, and I have a big house, so there's room for you." I was grateful to her for this invitation, for a second chance to have a family. A real family that didn't care about money but about each other. Meanwhile, Paisley and Vint were going through their own trials in Hawaii. I found out later from the news and from Eleanor, who was following reports of Tropical Storm Moana hitting Hawaii at the exact time my daughter and son-in-law were there. They spent 5 days in an evacuation center before they were able to fly home. Their hotel was severely damaged, with many belongings lost. Paisley was especially worried about the loss of expensive purchases made with my money: designer clothes, jewelry, shoes. Vint was more concerned about financial loss. They had spent almost half of the stolen money in the first few days of their vacation, and reimbursement from the hotel and insurance company could take months. They returned home exhausted, disappointed, and considerably poorer than they had planned. Their luxurious vacation had turned into a nightmare, and the loot they had so shamelessly taken from me had melted like snow in the hot sun. The first thing they did when they got back to their home in Horn Lake was to come and see me. They probably expected to find me there, discharged from the hospital, helpless, in need of their care. Or perhaps they thought I was still in the hospital and it would be possible to continue to ignore me, using the remaining money for their own needs. Eleanor later told me what she learned from a neighbor, Mrs. Goodwin. Paisley and Vint arrived in the evening, tired after a long flight. They were surprised to find the house dark and locked. They rang the doorbell, knocked, tried to look in the windows. Mrs. Goodwin, noticing movement outside my house, came out to see what was the matter. She knew I had gone to my sister's, for I had told her before I left. "Noah's gone," she told them. "For good." "Gone how? Where?" Paisley was shocked. "To his sister's in Texas, I think," Mrs. Goodwin replied. "He stopped by to say goodbye a few days ago, said he wasn't coming back." Paisley and Vint exchanged worried glances. This wasn't part of their plan. "We have the key," Vint said, pulling it out of his pocket. We wanted to see if the house was all right." Mrs. Goodwin looked at them suspiciously, but didn't interfere. She knew about our complicated relationship. They went into the house and turned on the lights. Everything looked almost the same as it always had, except for a few empty shelves where photos and memorabilia used to stand. The house was quiet and empty, as if its very soul had disappeared with me. "Papa," called Paisley, though she knew I was gone. "Papa, are you here?" Silence was her answer. They went around the house, upstairs, checked all the rooms. In my bedroom, the dresser drawers were half empty. I'd taken the clothes I needed. There was no picture of Audrey on the bedside table, which was always there. "He's really gone," Paisley whispered, and for the first time there was something like remorse in her voice. They went down to the kitchen and only then noticed the envelope on the table. Their names were written in my neat handwriting on the front. Vint opened the envelope and began to read aloud. As he read, his voice grew quieter and quieter, and Paisley's face grew paler. When he finished, there was a heavy silence in the kitchen. "He knew," Paisley finally said. "He knew all along what we were going to do." "And he filed a police report," Vint added, crumpling the letter in his hand. "Hell, that's all we need is trouble with the law." "Do you think they'll investigate?" Paisley sounded afraid. "We had power of attorney. To manage his finances, not to steal all his savings and fly to Hawaii," Vint snapped. especially with those texts and photos we sent. That's proof of intent." They began to argue, blaming each other for the situation. Paisley shouted that it had been Vince's idea to send the photos from the airplane. Vince countered that she had written that message first. "What are we supposed to do now?" Paisley finally asked, sinking back into her chair. "We only have about $7,000 of that money left, and the reimbursement from the hotel and insurance could take months. We don't even know how much we'll get back." "We could sell the house," Vince suggested. "He must have left a will." "Are you an idiot?" Paisley exclaimed. "He's alive, and by the looks of it, he's determined to live a long time despite us. We don't get this house until he's dead, and now that he has broken off relations with us, we may never get it at all." The reality of their situation slowly began to dawn on them. Not only had they lost most of the money they had stolen, but they had lost their future inheritance and the opportunity to further manipulate me for financial gain. Their greed had turned against themselves. "Do you realize what we've done?" Paisley whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "We've ruined everything, everything." "Oh, now you're repenting," Vince sneered. "When it's too late to fix things?" "Shut up," she shouted. "Just shut up. At least I realize we lost more than money. He's my father, damn it, the only parent I have left, and now he doesn't even want to know me." For the first time in a long time, I saw in her a glimpse of the little girl I once loved so much. Perhaps somewhere deep inside, beneath the layers of selfishness and greed, she still remembered the bonds of family, of what it meant to be a daughter. But it was too late. The bridge had been burned and I wasn't going to build a new one. They spent a few more hours at my house, trying to come up with a plan of action. They decided not to touch the house yet. It might come in handy if the police did start investigating. They hoped I was bluffing, that the police report was just a threat. But deep down inside, they knew I wasn't the kind of person to throw words around. In the end, they left empty-handed and heavy-hearted. Their perfect plan had turned out to be a disaster. Instead of wealth and a carefree life, they got debt, fear of possible criminal prosecution, and the severing of family ties. And me? I started a new life in Texas. Eleanor's house became my home. The small, cozy town welcomed me as one of its own. I continued my rehabilitation, gradually regaining mobility. Eleanor introduced me to her friends, and soon I had my own social circle. A group of seniors who gathered at the local library to discuss books, played chess in the park, and went to concerts by the local orchestra. I started helping out at the community center, advising people on insurance. My expertise was in demand. It gave me a sense of usefulness, a feeling that I still had something to offer the world. Sometimes I thought about Paisley and Vin, about how their lives had turned out since our breakup. The police did start an investigation into my claim, but as I'd suspected, the case was complicated because of the power of attorney. However, the mere fact of the investigation probably made them nervous. Did they learn any lesson from this story? Had they changed? I didn't know, and frankly, I didn't want to know anymore. That chapter of my life was closed. One warm fall evening, Eleanor and I were sitting on the veranda of her house watching the sunset. The sun was coloring the sky in shades of pink and gold. A light breeze rustled the leaves of the trees. "You don't regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Regret what?" "Breaking up with my daughter. About leaving everything behind." I wondered. Did I have regrets? There were moments of longing, of course. Moments when I remembered little Paisley with her red pigtails and freckles on her nose. But then I remembered the adult Paisley, her greed, her betrayal, her smiling face in that airplane picture. "No," I answered honestly. "I have no regrets. I did everything I could for her, gave her everything I could give her. At some point, you have to accept that some relationships can't be saved. And it's not your fault." Eleanor nodded and squeezed my hand. "You deserve better, Noah. We both do." And I knew she was right. At 75, I'd started a new life. A life without manipulation, without feeling used, without constant disappointment. A life where I was valued for who I was, not for what I could give. The sun disappeared over the horizon, leaving behind a soft glow. The day was over, but tomorrow would bring a new one, and I was ready to face it with an open heart, leaving the past behind. As for Paisley and Went, their greed had not only destroyed our family ties, it had robbed them of the financial support they had always counted on. They were left with nothing, no money, no inheritance, no way to manipulate me in the future. And perhaps that was the fairest punishment they could have received. In the end, we all get what we deserve. I deserve peace and a new family, and they deserve the consequences of their actions, a life where they would have to rely on themselves alone, without the ability to parasitize on the kindness of others.